Let us talk about the last battle, which is our last little talk about the books. We don't need to talk about the order because the last battle is the last book, and everybody agrees about that. We should talk about the planet, though. You could have figured out that it was Saturn because of the 7 planets that they believed there were in the medieval world. That's the only one that was left. Now, what is Saturn like? Remember, the book isn't really about Saturn. None of the books are about the planet. Each of the books are influenced by a planet, which means the planet's powers and personality and way that they are influences the way the story goes. Let me read you about Saturn from his poems, the poem called The Planets. Up far beyond goes Saturn, seventh in the 7th, silent in the 7th region. It's the 7th of the 7 planets. The skirts of the sky, scant grows the light, sickly, uncertain. The sun's finger daunted with darkness. Distance hurts us, and the vault severe of vast silence. Where fancy fails us, and fair language, and love leaves us, and light fails us, and Mars fails us, and the mirth of Jove is as tin tinkling. In tattered garment, weak with winters, he walks forever a weary way, wide round the heaven, stooped and stumbling, with staff groping, the Lord of Lead. He is the last planet, old and ugly. His eye fathers pale pestilence, pain of envy, remorse and murder. Melancholy drink, for bane or blessing, of bitter wisdom he pours for his people, a perilous draught that the lip loves not. We leave all things to reach the rim of the round welkin, heaven's hermitage, high and lonely. So here's a couple of things about Saturn, the last planet. Old. Cold is often associated with old age and cold. It also described it as old and ugly, which is exactly how Shift is described, the monkey. He was very old and very ugly. The light grows scant. The light is sickly and uncertain at the end as the sun gets squeezed out and there's no more light. Talks about the vault overhead. Do you remember in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we found out that Narnia is in a world that is flat, which means there's some kind of vault that goes over it. And at the end, there's the dark spot at the very top of the vault that stretches out over and over, and it's all the stars and all the lights being taken away. Weak with winters. At the end, everything is frozen. Remorse, murder, pale, pestilence, everything that is sad and awful is about this. Very interestingly enough, in one of the written manuscripts for the Silver Chair, so in C.S. Lewis's handwriting, remember when the children are underground and they see the big sleeping giant and the gnomes underground say, that is Father Time. He will awake when all comes to an end, when the world ends. Well, in the written manuscript, they say that is the god Saturn. They say he will awaken at the end of time. But when the book was printed, they changed it to Father Time. Now, Michael Ward, who is the one who discovered all of this stuff about the planets and has written about it, he believes, and I think probably rightly so, that Lewis, that's what he was thinking, but he had them take Saturn out of there, or it would have really given it away. The other books do mention the planets that influence them, but that would have been so obvious to have actually had Saturn, the god Saturn, be one of the characters in the book. But it does kind of give it away to us in a good way. So it's very clearly influenced by that. The Last Battle won the Carnegie Medal for Best Children's Book. You maybe didn't know that. A lot of people think that it's very odd for a children's book because there's a lot of death in it. It is actually very sad and very unsettling until you go through the stable door and you are reunited with Aslan. But before that, every time it seems like something good might happen, your hopes are dashed and something worse happens than you even expected. It even tells us that at the very beginning. This is the story about the last of the kings of Narnia. It tells us that he's fighting his last battle, that he's the last king. These are his last friends. These are the last days. It's all over, so it really shouldn't be a surprise to us. But how are you possibly going to end a book that's about the end in a way that's good? But he does do that, doesn't he? Another thing that's kind of strange about it is in this book, the king that we meet is almost 25. He's almost an adult. In the other books, the kings are all younger. They're princes, and there's often an adult who's helping them, like in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Drinian, the man who helped steer, he is the one who sort of gave wisdom and guidance. Puddleglum gives wisdom and guidance to the children, even though the children get to be on the adventure. But in this one, it's the children who have come to help the adult. Things have gotten so bad that they need the children's help. Now, in Prince Caspian, the children did come to help, but Prince Caspian was as young as them, right? So that's something that's very different. Saturn, in old mythology, in the Middle Ages, part of his influence was that he knew a lot about the stars, star lore and information. And do you remember Centaur Runewit, the centaur? It was all about if this was Aslan really here, the stars would tell me, and they're not telling me that. Jove, or Jupiter, each planet in astronomy has one of the constellations that is kind of associated with it, and Sagittarius is associated with Jupiter or Jove, and that's the planet that influences the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. We meet Aslan, who is not safe, but he's good because he's the king. So that's the strongest and the most joyful planet of all. His constellation is Sagittarius, which is a centaur who is carrying a bow and arrow. And in the last battle, we had the centaur who is killed by a bow and arrow. There is probably a little bit of a story behind that. I think it's amazing that a book that has so much sadness in it ends up being such a joyful story. There's every reason to cry for a while because all of the people that you love and care for are killed in battle or die or turn against Narnia. But then at the end, it's so good and happy. Except for one thing. The thing about Susan, right? So let me read you. This is volume 3 of C.S. Lewis's letters. 3 big books like that. And I have read all of them, but I don't remember all of them. I have to go back and look for the ones that I want to talk about. There's 3 letters about Susan. This one is written in 1955 to someone named Marcia Billiard. And she was writing about the books and asking some questions. And he said, first of all, he wrote thousands of letters. People wrote him so many letters and he answered all of them. I am so glad that you like the Narnian books. They're called the Chronicles of Narnia. They're about the country Narnia, but he called them the Narnian books. After Prince Caspian came The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, then The Silver Chair, then The Horse and His Boy. These have all been published. Next autumn will come The Magician's Nephew, and the year after that, The Last Battle. At least, I think that will be the name, but I might change it, which will finish off the series. Peter gets back to Narnia in it, but I am afraid Susan does not. Haven't you noticed in the 2 that you have read that she is rather fond of being too grown up? I'm sorry to say that that side of her got stronger, and she forgot about Narnia. So he'd already planned or discovered or decided that Susan was not going to get back into Narnia. And it's not because someone said, you can't come in. It's because she doesn't want to go back to Narnia. In 1957, so this was 2 years later, starting in 1950, a book was published every year. So 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56 is when The Last Battle was published. This is in January of 1957, so very shortly after Martin Kilmer had read it. And Martin Kilmer was a child that C.S. Lewis wrote many letters to. And he said, "Dear Martin," he had read The Last Battle and had questions about Susan. And C.S. Lewis said, "The books don't tell us what happened to Susan. She is left alive in this world at the end, having by then turned into a rather silly, conceited young woman. But there is plenty of time for her to mend, and perhaps she will get to Aslan's country in the end, in her own way. I think that whatever she had seen in Narnia, she could, if she wanted to, she could persuade herself as she grew up that it was all nonsense," which maybe is what she did. And then in 1960, to Mary Willis Shelburne, who is another person that he wrote more than one letter to. So, wait a second, that's not the one I'm looking for. No, it's to Pauline Bannister. I'm sorry, but I saw the one to Mary Willis Shelburne on this page. This is February of 1960. And Pauline Bannister had written a book. She was very, very upset that in The Last Battle, Susan wasn't there. And she wrote C.S. Lewis to tell him that. Dear, and then she also said, I think she must have said, could you write a letter about what happens to her? Lewis didn't save the letters that were sent to him. We just have his responses to people, so you have to kind of figure out what they were saying. Dear Pauline Bannister, I could not write that story myself. Not that I have no hope of Susan ever getting to Aslan's country, so he maybe does have hope, but because I have a feeling that the story of her journey would be longer and more like a grown-up novel than I would want to write. But I may be mistaken. Why not try it yourself? So we don't know, well, we do know that Susan doesn't end up back in Narnia the same way that the children do that we saw there. But he says she's still alive in her world, and maybe she will find her way back there again. So I am just so happy that I got to read these with you. And what I want to say is there's so many great things in these books that you probably noticed many of them, but there's an endless number of great things. And that even if you read these books 50 times, and that is possible, you will keep finding new things that are enjoyable and exciting. There were some things when I read these out loud, and I have read them probably almost 50 times, that I'd never noticed before, because when I read them, I usually read them silently to myself. I've read them out loud to my children, but I wasn't thinking about them the same way at the time. I was just enjoying the story with them. So maybe it's because I'm older and I noticed things. I don't think so, though. I think children can notice all the things. So I hope that you read them many, many times. Once you've read them once in the order that he meant us to read them, you can read them in whatever order you want after this. You can pick whichever one you want to read next, because you've met Aslan the way you were supposed to, and you've made all the discoveries you were supposed to. Now when you read them, it's not because you wonder what happened, you know. It's now you can notice all the other things that you couldn't notice the first time because you were so excited about waiting to see what would happen. So I read them every year, sometimes more than once a year, and they never, ever get old or boring. And I never think, oh, I'll probably never read these again. I always think there are so many wonderful things in here. So thank you for sharing them with me. I would love to listen to you read them someday. And if you draw any pictures about Narnia, I would love to see those as well.